Welcome to Belief, Being, and Beyond with your host, Granddaughter Crow. Hi, everybody. Granddaughter Crow here with yet another episode of Belief, Being, and Beyond. And sometimes, in order to go beyond, you got to step back to the earth. You got to know what your belief is and where it is coming from and what informs that belief. And how you believe constitutes how you are being in this life, how you function day to day. And then there's always something more, there's always something beyond. I am so excited. Today, we get to talk with Dr. Maceo Carrillo Martinet. Woo woo. That's a mouthful.
Yay.
Let me
It
let
is
me
a
try.
mouthful.
I love it. Dr. Maceo. So for over 24 years, Dr. Maceo Martinet has been co-creating and implementing community-based ecological restoration and education projects across New Mexico and beyond, helping communities restore land and water. Whew, yes, and
Yes.
water has been both his professional and personal passion and obligation since he can remember. And this is what we love on the show is people who live what they are talking about. And you can tell that he lives what he's talking about. His book, oh my goodness, you guys, Healing the Land, teaches us who we are. I'm going to go ahead and take a second and read how indigenous cultural resistance can restore the earth, recover communities, and create sustainable futures. Woo! Yes, we're going there, people. We are going there. And I love it as Granddaughter Crow. You know, I'm all about the wisdom of the natural world and how to learn from the earth. This book is published by North Atlantic Books. It is a culmination of his experiences working in community on projects to restore the land, but also attempts to situate ecological restoration into historical and cultural context in these tumultuous times, right? Got that right. He received his doctorate in biology from the University of New Mexico, where he focused on ecology, fresh water sciences, and environmental education. Presently, he teaches a hands-on course. You will find that Dr. Maceo is very hands-on, very grounded, very amazing. Um, and he teaches that hands-on course at UNM on watershed and community restoration and is planning to take students to do this work internationally. Oh my goodness. Without further ado, Dr. Maceo, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Granddaughter Crow. Thank you for that beautiful introduction. And hello to the viewers and listeners out there and
Abs
beyond.
out there and beyond. I love this. You know what I find so beautiful is that not only the dedication and this beautiful book, you guys, you can pick it up. It just released here in the month of June. You can get it anywhere you get your favorite books. You can always just walk in there and say, "Hey, do you have Healing the Land Teaches Us Who We Are?" By Dr. Maceo, and they'll be like, "Yes," or they'll be like, "We will order it for you." So we
Right.
got you covered there. It is so amazing because what I love is the intersection between ecology, the natural world, science, biology, grounded, hard science, right? Fact based, quantifiable science meets cultural awareness, historical restoration, and drawing the lines by saying, wait, when you do this hard science, it is more than just science, left hemisphere. You are actually, let's set the record straight historically, culturally, with indigenous bodies, indigenous stories around how to take care of the land because there was a connection back then. So, of course, my first question is, how did you connect these two models? Where did that come from? Because I think we need more of hard science, cultural awareness, setting the record straight with history and indigenous people.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Um, I think it's from just how I grew up and the people I was around. So I grew up in San Francisco, very urbanized, urban area, but I had a lot of people that were very connected to their culture, their history. I grew up also in a lot of political 1960s folks that were into the AIM and Brown and the Brown Berets and the Black Panther Party. And so I kind of grew in an environment that was very self-aware and struggling to become more self-aware. And so in that kind of mix, for some reason, I was an urban kid, but I just was drawn to the nature. So all the parks I visited in San Francisco, me and my friends. I remember the day I left the city to come to New Mexico. There was a red-tailed hawk circling us the whole time we were having our final session, and I figured there's a lot of examples like that where Mother Earth always spoke to me, even in a very urban environment. In fact, one of the connections that I always made was this kind of city where we kind of slept and ate and everything on top of each other, it felt like, and going to the edge of the ocean where the ocean meets the land and these coral reefs and these low where you could see them in low tide and how life itself right there was also living on top of each other but needed to live on top of each other else they'd be washed away. So I kept seeing those two worlds um, kind of connected. And I think one of the sayings that I kind of grew up with was how, we treat, if we don't know our history, we don't know how to move forward in the future. That's one. And then the other one that was very common was, which I didn't really understand, was what we do to the land, we do to ourselves, and what we do to ourselves, we do to the land. Those were kind of common themes that carried through the circles that I grew up in. And so, as a young man, I got hired to do ecological restoration. That's, planting trees where there are no trees, hilling the land so a denuded landscape becomes, can be able to grow grass again and its flowers again. When I started to do this work, I started to reflect on those earlier experiences, those early sayings, and that's kind of how I became, at that intersection. I kind of the work and the intersection found me, and I didn't go out looking for it. It just became, I became in a position that I can see, you know, both from my own personal point of view, my own experience, but also connected to what's going around the planet right now and the state of crisis that takes on many different forms, whether it's fire, whether it's, erosion off of, the desertification. Um, and I started seeing a theme where a lot of communities that were healing this land, whether it typically from, industrialization or all kinds of things, with that, the hotel industry, the tourism industry, but mainly the industrialization, urbanization, and agriculture production. So all these communities around the world were trying to restore their land. Well, it turned out the pattern that I saw was these are communities that are basically returning to their indigenous practices, relationships, understandings. It became a portal. It became an opening to to really reflect on the intersection between, the hardcore science, how we live, the material world, but also the cultural and spiritual connection. And that to me it's an important story, and that's why I decided to write it. I actually didn't try to write a book. I was writing curriculum for students, a curriculum that didn't exist anywhere as far as I could find.
Right.
And writing those stories up, it became like a flood. And I kept writing and writing and writing. And next thing I know, I had a book. So,
Ah, yes. I think it's so beautiful because it sounds very organic that you were right there at
yeah.
that intersection that between understanding person of color, indigenous people, people with culture, people with stories that have
Mm,
been passed down. And then also, you've got the science, which
mhm,
allows that voice to go even further. It
mm,
allows the
yeah.
voice of the ancestors, the cultural expression to go even further because it now explains that these stories of cultural awareness in indigenous communities and how they worked with the land, worked
Mm,
with the land, right?
mhm,
Actually now can go into more of the Western civilization of it's our resource, blah, blah, blah,
mhm.
you know?
Right,
And
right.
so I think that it's a very beautiful beacon that you are helping us carry and to see. It's got legs
Mm.
because of your doctorate, you know?
Yeah, yeah, I agree. Yeah, I think sometimes that's why I did the doctorate. It wasn't because I wanted to, be on some hierarchy of knowledge, but I was the way I was taught was I have a responsibility to uplift people, younger folks, my community, and my family. And an avenue that was open to me at the time was to do this doctorate, and so I decided to do it in water, specifically on a desert where at that time I was living in New Mexico, and water, as you know, can imagine, and any desert in the world, it's precious. So I figured, okay, what would be the best to be prepared and to help my community is to know a little something about water.
Right?
Yeah. But you bring up another thing in me, and that's when I was doing my doctorate, I continuously would think about, I would read, for example, there's a story that was taught to me as a young graduate student that was like the avant-garde Western science research. And it basically looked at how the sun's energy gets recycled from the trees down to the roots, into the leaves, into the insects, into the soil, back into the trees, and it goes back into the sky. Then it comes, so that it kind of captured a cycle looking at the sun's energy from the suns. And of course, in the science world, it was more kilojoules of this and carbon atoms of this. It was more quantitative. But
Right.
what I realized really quickly is that this is just what Native people around the world typically, it's a general statement, but typically indigenous lands of the world always saw things in cycles,
Yes.
always saw things in energy cycles and relationships. That cycle involves relationships of everything that were around us and within us. And so to me, the Western science was catching up to native science, and I think, I think we're in an age where we're realizing that there's other sciences out there, not just Western science, that we all need to be aware of and reconcile with, because that's really what climate change is about, is reconciling what has what has driven us to this point, what has kind of defined our path,
Yeah.
but more importantly, what how can we change that path, and how do we change what we're doing so that we can live on this planet a little bit longer and not
Right?
destroy it. The only
Right?
way to do that is to start listening to all of humanity, not just one part of it. Yeah,
Oh, the full circle, not a
the full
line. Not it's
circle.
not linear. Yeah, it's
Right.
it's a circle. I talk like that too. You
Yeah.
know, And so this book is absolutely brilliant because one of the beautiful things, I mean, you bring the scholarly knowledge, but you also bring this humanity to it. You bring
Mm,
this cultural awareness as though you're like, hey guys, remember what was handed down culturally by the ancestors who actually did work with the land, not lord over and that type of thing.
right,
You
right,
have the book, and it is broken into four beautiful parts: water, earth, fire, and air. All of the beautiful elements, which although it's science, and you're Dr. Maceo, and you have a degree in ecology and biology, and well, we understand the gigabytes or whatever those terms were, the
you're right,
quantifiable terms, but you break
right,
it down in a way that speaks to the human race. It speaks to the people. It doesn't just speak to the science of it, but you
right.
bring that in. And in each one of these parts you bring up cultural stories.
Mm,
You remind us of cultural stories. And I think that that reminds me of the bigger circle, not just with the sun and the earth and all of that, but the circle of humanity and how we sit in circle with our culture, with our ancestors, with where we have come from, our belief system, and remembering those ways of relationship. I think that's
yeah,
the best way to say it. The relationship. You show
right.
us relationship beyond science. So could you kind of maybe, without giving too much away about the inner workings of your book, would you kind of give us maybe a little teaser of one of the elements and one of the stories that we might find in your book?
Okay. Yeah, so to talk about that the division or the kind of organization of the book, Earth, Fire, Water, and Air, that kind of seemed like a good way to organize it because it was a lot of stuff. It was a lot of material, and I was trying to figure out how to best organize. Yeah, it's kind of weighty. Yeah, and I thought it was really useful as well because what winded up happening to me while I was writing this, I was writing it during the pandemic, and which in and of itself became almost like my own therapy to get through the kind of doomsday scenario of that period of time, which is, continued. But I started realizing that each of these elements needed their own space to be recognized, their own space to be honored. And the way I related to each of the elements in the stories, so each section has various stories, is where fire and water and earth, air are our teachers. That's how we learned how to be human beings. And if they've taught us how to be human beings, you know, at some point in our history, they're always teaching us how to do it again. And
Yeah.
it's just a matter of us kind of reconnecting and relearning and maybe even digesting and metabolizing and recycling some of the things that were, that we've been thinking for a long time. Recycling in the sense of like a compost pile. You put all the things the scraps of things that you don't want in your life or you don't want in society or you don't want anymore. And that can be a point of making really nutritious soil.
Mhm.
Um, so the one of the stories, I guess, is, you know, so a lot of in each of these sections, I talk a little of stories about me, stories about other people. Um, and one of the stories in the water, so this is one incident, but it happened several times where I was in a pretty high level meeting around water. And it was actually a legal out of court settlement. So it's, lawyers representing tribes, the state, the city, the irrigation community, which out here they're called acequieros or acequia communities, They were all in this meeting talking about how best to save water because the issue is that because of climate change and the way we've been managing land, the water is coming off the mountains much sooner, even way before farmers can even start planting. And so the issue at that we were talking about is how do we save more water in the mountains so that we can have it more for cities downstream, so that we can have it for our farmers downstream. And this is a quandary that a lot of people around the world are facing. And one of the it was very clear that the federal people, the people that were federal agencies, they said, well, we have these big dams. We could just increase the height of the dam, which actually would take millions and millions of dollars. The tribes and the Sekia folks were saying, well, isn't there a way that we can do work high up in the mountains? Maybe do these little rock dams, they were saying. And to which, some of the scientists kind of chuckled, like, oh, what are little rock dams going to do? Well, it turns out that there's been serious USGS, which is one of the top science organizations in the country, has actually studied the impacts of these little rock dams. And there's a famous case. There's many cases, but in this case, they looked at one family that did thousands of these rock dams throughout the watershed.
Yeah.
And the scientists came and looked at that watershed that was had a lot of rock dams and compared it to a watershed that doesn't have any. And what they found was the area that had tons of rock dams had more water, had more wildlife, had more colors, had more sounds, had more life. And so what what that story kind of represented and what I kind of do for a living in a lot of places where if I go to a land and it's denuded, the first thing I do is I work with rocks, I work with pieces of wood to help conserve water, basically these rock dam structures in various different configurations, right?
Yeah.
That practice is as old as the hills themselves. It's an old indigenous
Wow.
practice throughout this this area is Pueblo and Diné and Apache, this area. And the Pueblos are known for their gardens that they had these rock gardens almost throughout the whole area here at a scale that we can't even comprehend today. You
Wow.
just see vestiges of it, and very few people that are from New Mexico know that some of these mesas were completely covered in rock gardens. What they essentially did is through community work, through tons of community work, they created these rock dam structures that in effect created sponge. The land became a sponge because anytime the water would fall, it would collect and dam behind these little rock dams and seep into the ground. And it essentially created, a lot of healthy grassland, a lot of healthy vegetation, which led to healthy everything. And so that's kind of the first one of the examples of, here we are talking about what to do to confront less water or water that's coming off the mountains. And we're going right back to these old school methods. And so, one of my mentors loves to say, and this is it became a mantra in the book, is all the old is new again, you
Yes.
know?
All
And
the
so
old.
that
Okay.
Yeah, and so that to me is just one example. And then the stories for fire and for earth and for air are very similar in that sense, where there's an issue that we need to address, whether it's mega fire, whether it's losing languages and how we're seeing things with language, um, and with the earth, how we're essentially losing our connection to the earth. We a lot of what we need to do is to go back to, for lack of better words, earlier relationships, which are actually not anything of history. That's not Many times it's known as prehistory or what the ancestors did, but actually it's it's that is a cutting edge. That's a cutting edge of science. It's a cutting edge of community work. That's a cutting edge of of adapting to climate change. So, the whole linear thinking of the past is just the past, that's upside down. And the Earth herself is pushing us that direction, whether we realize it or not.
If you are enjoying this show, you can support it by liking, subscribing, and sharing. Also, connect with us, leave a comment, text the show option wherever you listen to podcasts, leave a review, or email us at beliefbeingbeyond@gmail.com. Also, I'm on Patreon, where a small donation goes a long way. Find this and more episodes at granddaughtercrow.com. Thank you. Now back to the show. I love it. So, for
Yeah.
all of you who are studying, climate change, environmental science, you're working with all of this stuff in your job or whatever, this is a good resource. I'm just saying. So, beyond that, then in the book, you talk about how they all combined. And
Mm.
in that, I love that you kind of broke it out with these four basic elements. And then you come back and go, but it's about the combination. And I'm looking at that and it's like the combination between the elements, the combination between humanity and ecology and those systems, the system of being a human and the system of being Mother Earth. There are interconnections, there are direct correlations. And I absolutely love that one of my things, and I'm just side noting, one of my things is that, yeah, what is old is now new because it's a circle. You know,
Yeah.
it's a
Right.
circle.
Exactly. Exactly.
But anyway, I wanted to go back into the concept of the combination
Mm.
human and ecology systems, the interconnectivity, the cultural awareness, the diversity, the restoration, the relationship, all of those huge concepts that we talk about in so many different circles. If we slow down and get our little rock formations and slow our little, right, slow ourselves down
Right.
a little bit, we can actually absorb that this is a beautiful correlation between humanity and the natural world. And in fact, I would think that if somebody were listening to this 100 years ago, they'd be like, why would she even say that? Of course it is.
Right.
You know? So talk
Right.
to us a
Exactly.
little bit about that correlation between humanity and teaching us who we are. Healing the land teaches us who we are as
Yeah.
people. We're sitting down tonight with Dr. Maceo. So what do you think
Yeah.
about that?
Well, yeah, and that's the pattern I was alluding to earlier is um, you know, I guess the book is also a shout out or a dedication or a gift to, I think, humanity's indigeneity, for lack of a better word. I mean, I think where, Robin Kimmer would say, and she's an author of Braiding Sweetgrass that a lot of people know that was very inspirational to my work. And I've met her before, and she's a very powerful woman. She once, and she said this once, that we're all indigenous to some place. And
Yes.
so in these stories of restoration, I didn't just want to focus on the Americas. I because I'm from the, North America, I tended to look at Americas first, but I extended my vision beyond that, partly because I wanted this to relate to our global community. I wanted anybody in the world to be able to pick this up and maybe see themselves in this book, but also because this is a pattern that the cool thing about the pattern is that it's everywhere you look. And, you know, for for somebody in the continent of Africa or Europe or Southeast Asia or Australia or South America, Central America, or the Caribbean islands, those are all kind of places where these stories are from. But what they show is that the indigenous folks of those particular areas, including Europe, which which I think is a very important part of the story.
Yeah.
Um, that that experience hasn't really been understood. Those stories haven't been really comprehended in kind of, in us figuring out our sustainable, living. How are we going to become adapted to climate change? How are we going to change, our curriculum? We just have, I think we really have to look at our whole human experience. We're 300,000 years old, or at least but we only really know the last 2,000 years, if that.
That, if
I
that.
mean,
Yeah.
industrialization is a blip on our radar. And so there's a longer story, a longer something to say, a longer experience that we've only scratched the surface. And to me, that's an opportunity. It's a necessity for us to figure out if how we're going to move forward to really understand our past. Going back to, how I grew up, that's the saying that I grew up with. But to me, I think, like for example, in Europe, one of the places that in England that has the most species of butterfly, that has the most endemic species of plants, that has, I think, 50 different kind of dragonflies, that has a plethora of life. One of the most biodiverse areas in England is their old common lands, their old indigenous common lands it's called a floodplain meadow. And it's only like 300 acres
Wow.
within, the whole island, right? But it's been practiced as a common lands for thousands of years. It just so happens that that's also the place that has the most biodiversity. So it's
Wow.
within all of our cultures. If we were to go back to those areas that have the most biodiversity, that have, a plethora of different things, they tend to be those areas that were communal lands, that were lands that we, had positive, that we experienced how to collectively manage land, became those same areas that are today the sought after examples of how to move forward.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of, Eleanor Ostrom, who won, she was a scientist that 2009 won the global, um, oh gosh, the one of the prize, I can't remember which prize it is, Nobel Peace Prize,
Wow.
in
Wow.
economics.
Wow.
She won, and all she did, and I don't mean to reduce what she did, but all she did was to show that common lands actually produce very sustainable outcomes. And she looked at communities in Africa, the continent of Africa and Southeast Asia and Latin America. She looked at indigenous communities.
Wow.
And she showed that, the tragedy of the commons wasn't really a common thing. In fact, the tragedy of the commons, the only tragedy is that we don't know the commons. We don't know about a history of the commons. We don't know that common history is within all of us. That's the
Yes.
tragic part of it. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. There's been, of course, tragedies. It's not to say we've been perfect, but in our trajectory, there's more examples of us commonly working the land in partnership with different people, with communities in a healthy way than there is otherwise. And that's really important for us right now.
I love that. I agree. If you go back far enough in anybody's lineage, DNA, we all were indigenous. We all sat in circle. We all communed with the land. We all understood it beyond English, not to
Mm-hmm.
dis-English, but
Right.
we understood it in our body. We understood what it felt like when the air was dry. We understood what it felt like. We sensed these things. And sometimes now we get so far removed, not just because of the screens and the phones and all of this, but we
Yeah.
get so far removed because my father used to say, we talk so intelligently about our confusion But if you, right? But if you know in here, and this is exactly what he's talking about. We're having these big, UN meetings or these big meetings, and we're talking so intelligently about our confusion. But
Right.
take a minute, if you take a minute and relax and reconnect with yourself and the land, it speaks so much. And it doesn't always speak in human language. It speaks in
Right.
sensation. It speaks in
Right.
patterns. What do
Right.
you think about that?
Well, yeah. Yeah, I'm language is so air is one of the elements is where I talk about language because I make the connection, air is the birth of breathing, and breathing is the birth of language. In fact, I there's a great quote that breathing is older than language. Um,
I love that.
the thing that's crazy is the word nature in English
Yeah.
doesn't that concept of nature doesn't exist in most of humanity. So the one word that in English and in Spanish and in other kind of dominant, quote unquote, dominant languages, the word nature doesn't exist. And the reason why is because there's no disconnection, there's no separation between what is outside and what and your body. There's no word for that in most, I think, and I would venture to say a lot of indigenous cultures throughout the world. And maybe that's something you just see when you become very localized. You live in a place for a very long time and you see how everything is connected. There is no distinction between how you feel and how the land feels. There's a deep relationship there. Um, so I kind of got into the weeds with the English and Spanish. And the other thing that's important for us to realize is when Columbus set sail about 2 weeks later, a friar uh, went to the Spanish queen and said, we really need to set up shop around language. And the way he put it was that the written language is a companion of empire. And just the idea that language is a companion of empire, and that is it signifies to me how language can be a weapon and has been
Yes.
weaponized. And
Yes.
language is, as Bell Hooks and Audre Lorde would say, language, how we define ourselves, how we define everything around us, is a place of struggle, is a place for us to discuss, to debate, for us to self-question, for us to ponder and to think about. Yet we use nature all the time without really thinking of
Yes.
how that might be shaping our way of thinking. We say natural resources. When we talk about everything in nature, we call it natural resources,
Right.
which fundamentally means it's a very mechanical, materialistic way of seeing things. It's only important, a mountain's only important if I can extract that bentonite out of it, or if I can extract that thing out of it and make it's a resource to be used. It's
Wow.
not, it's not, it's not recognized by its name or recognized by its God or earth name. That is typically how it was recognized for maybe a longer part of humanity, right? So it's both a window, language is both an air, is both a window into, how we have to self-criticize everything that comes out of our mouth and be accountable to those words. But also, it's opening the door to unlimited imagination. I mean,
Yeah.
language. If you're a linguist and you study how different cultures talk about plants and animals and mountains, you are literally learning a lot about the human poetry, the human experience on this land. And that to me is super important. I'm not a linguist. I'm just I scratched enough to know that it's important that we
Yes.
go beyond English and go beyond.
Yes.
And you mentioned it right on, that the original we learned all of our languages. They came from some place, some experience that humans were having with their environment. and and there's one of the ways to monitor a health of a land and to see if it's if you're helping to restore land to a wounded land,
Yeah.
or a measure to see how wounded an ocean is literally to learn the sounds of that place.
Oh,
Bioacou- Bioacoustics, that word, or ecoacoustics, those are technical terms that basically just means you can tell a lot by the land, by the symphony of voices, So you're absolutely right. It's not just a human language here that we're talking about. It's the languages of life. That's
oh,
that's I think the languages that we need to learn and listen to beyond our own.
wow. See, you
That's
guys.
why it's belief and beyond.
It is beyond. It is beyond. Healing the land teaches us who we are. It is not just a really quick, oh, I got it. It is an embodiment. It is an embodiment. And I love that, the language of the land, because I play with that. I am not a
Mhm.
linguist either. And if you guys watch this podcast, you know I even screw up English sometimes. So but at the end of the day, it is that acoustic, that sound. And, I listen sometimes to even people speaking a language that I don't understand, but yet you can kind of understand a little bit about, are they excited? Are they angry? It's the sound. And every morning I wake up and I hear the birds. And if I don't hear the birds, I'm like, there must be a storm or a hawk out
Right,
there,
right.
or there's something going on. So key into it, because even beyond that, listeners, the language that you speak is the language that you think in.
Hmm.
The language
Yeah.
that you speak is the language that you think in. So if you are speaking a language like Granddaughter
Mhm.
Crow in English, and it was a language that shows hierarchy and division and separation and labeling, just know that that's what it is. But there is languages beyond to include the
Right.
natural world. So
Exactly.
I have a question for you. Who did you write this book for?
I was hoping you'd ask that.
Yes.
So I wrote it for young students of color,
Mm,
like myself, that are wandering the planet, wanting to do something good on its behalf, but not knowing quite how and where to start. I essentially wrote it to myself, a younger self that I wish I had. I wish I had this book growing up. I wish someone gave it to me. And that's who I wrote, not necessarily dwelling on me, but just a younger person that's I worked with youth enough to know that they are, and most youth in every generation are like this. They want something different than what they've been given.
yeah,
And they realize that what they've been given is not all that hot, and it's there's a lot of they've inherited a mess from the previous generations. And so how do you change things,
yeah,
and where do you start? And those that are interested in doing something on the environmental sciences and all that we means, um I think I wrote it for them.
yeah. I absolutely love that, because I mean, it is funny, and I agree with generations. And when I was younger version of myself, I too was like, you gave me a broken system. What are you talking about? And
Right.
and yet you are now filling in that little cavern, that little place, with the thinking of the old ones. Once again, what is old is now new, and taking us back to what is important. Healing the
Right.
land teaches us who we are on so many levels, individuals,
Yeah.
people on so many levels beyond English. We can't even, I mean, it's got to be embodied, it's got to be experienced. But in order to get the lenses to be able to see that, listeners, pick up your copy. Healing the Land teaches us who we are. And if you have the resources, pick up a couple of them and donate them to your local library. If you are in university, ask your university library to get this book for your studies. It is written by a doctor who understands all of this, but it'll open your mind to something that your body already is paying attention to. That's
Right.
me, Granddaughter Crow, saying
Right.
that. Oh, yeah.
I appreciate that.
Oh,
Yeah.
100%, because that's, I mean, really, that's why I have this show, is because
Mm,
I want to take us all back to the heartbeat of the human race. I want to highlight the creators, the authors, the ones who live what they do and they think beyond. And with that, I am going to ask you a question that we ask all of our listeners.
okay.
Dr. Maceo, what lies beyond?
Well, I think endless possibility,
Mm.
endless connection, relationship. It's endless sounds and smells and tastes. And I think the beyond is also inside us and it's also all around us. It's not necessarily beyond this planet. Everything that we need to live is right here. It's always been and will always be.
Yay! Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. I love that. I absolutely love that. You guys, thank you so much. This evening we sat down with Dr. Maceo, and his book, Healing the Land, teaches us who we are. Get your copy. You can also find him at www.maceocm.com, which is www.maceocm.com, and
Right.
keep your eyes out, because even after you read this book, of course, keep one for your library, because this is going to do a lot of memory. And you know what? In a very interesting way, what I'm thinking is that the more that an individual reads the perspective, the worldview, the viewpoint that you're talking about, the more that they can probably investigate some of their own internal, their inner world and the outer environment, and
Right.
find that we are connected with it. There is no separation.
Yeah, I
I,
hope so. I hope that's the kind of hoping that this is just a departure, not necessarily an arrival. The other thing too is a part of it is to show that, and this is for various reasons, things, going to the wound to figure out how to heal the wound, and going to the wound actually is a place of healing, is a place that causes us to be creative, and that's kind of what the land teaches us.
I absolutely love it. And I'm just going to throw in my 2 cents. You know, the land is my greatest teacher and my greatest
Mm,
mentor, even in that sometimes when I listen to a human concept, spoken in English or dominant language or whatever, I take the concept and I try to find it in the natural world. And if I
mm,
cannot find that concept in the natural world, I know that it was man-made and it doesn't really make that much sense. For example,
right.
something very, very small would be the human concept of I don't belong. There are so many
Mm,
people on the face of this
yeah,
earth that are sensing I don't belong, the separation. But I
yeah.
went outside and I asked the tree, do you belong? You're so tall. Hey, rose bush, do you belong? Hey, ant, do you belong? All of them
Right,
didn't even understand. Of course they belong, and so do we.
right,
Thank you
exactly.
so much for what
Thank
you're
you.
bringing to this world. It has been a pleasure, a pleasure, a pleasure.
Thank you.
And listeners, like, subscribe, share. And we've got more coming up. But for now, Healing the Land teaches us who we are. Thank you so much, and we will see you on the flippity flip.
As always, thank you for listening to another episode of Belief, Being, and Beyond. Please subscribe and please share with a loved one who might enjoy this podcast. And please leave us a review. We really, really appreciate that. For more about Granddaughter Crow, please visit granddaughtercrow.com. There you can learn about classes, appearances, and all her books. And if you're interested in learning more about Jenny C. Bell, please visit jennycbell.com where you can learn about her books, her classes, and her archive and community. Thank you so much for listening. Blessed be.